Okay, we are now live on YouTube. It's 7 o'clock and we're ready to begin the meeting.
Okay, on we go then, troops. First of all, good evening and welcome everyone to this virtual meeting of the Audit Committee. The meeting is being streamed live on YouTube, so good evening also to any interested viewers that might be joining us for this meeting. The agenda and associated papers for the meeting are all available on the Council's website. And to ensure the audio for this meeting sounds as clear as possible to those tuning in, we will be muting all microphones as a default setting to keep background noise to a minimum. When wishing to speak, I will be grateful if members could raise their hand and wait to be invited to speak by myself. Your microphone will then be unmuted and you'll be able to speak. Members will be voting by raising their hand to indicate they are either in favour of the motion, against the motion, or are wishing to abstain. Right, so let's get on with it, troops. We've got a full agenda tonight. So agenda item 1 is to receive apologies for absence. As far as I'm aware, we have apologies from Councillor Christian Chapman.
That's right.
Yeah. Okay, I see that Councillor Jim Blagden's joined us. That's good. Can I ask, are there any further apologies to be submitted?
I haven't received any apologies, Chairman. Obviously, we are still waiting for Councillor Baird and Councillor Rostons. It looks like Councillor Baird's maybe just joining the meeting now.
Okie dokie. So are we quorum? Can we continue?
Yes, we're quorum. We can continue.
Okay. Let's move on then to agenda item 2. This is to consider any declarations of disclosable pecuniary or personal interests and non-disclosable pecuniary or other interests. Are there any declarations, please? I am looking, see nothing. Okay. Agenda item 3, pages 5 through 8 on the minutes. This item is to receive and approve as a correct record the minutes of the meeting of the committee held on the 1st of February 2021. Now, can I ask for someone to move them, please? I see Councillor Arnie Henkin, thank you. Could I also ask for a seconder, please? I see Councillor David Shaw, thank you very much. Does anyone wish to speak in relation to the accuracy of the meetings? No? I see no movement there. So can I therefore ask for a show of hands in favour of accepting them? Looks pretty much unanimous. Thank you very much. That's been carried. Okay. Agenda item 4. Mazars Audit Progress Report for the year ending 31 March 2021. This is page 9 through 22 on your notes. Could I please ask for one of the representatives from Mazars to present their report? Do we have someone?
Yeah, I'll take that, Chair, if that's okay.
Okay, Michael Butler, off you go, sir.
Brilliant. Thanks, Chair, and good evening, everyone. I'm pleased to present our March 21 audit progress report. I will take the report as read, but I just wanted to sort of highlight a few key changes. On page 11 of the agenda pack is our audit progress to date. So in terms of our planning and interim time, this has been undertaken with the officers at the council, and we are fully up to date in terms of our procedures and where we need to be. And going forward to field work, we've also planned some preliminary dates in with the officers to ensure when we receive draft statements, and we are still aiming for a 30th of September deadline in regards to the national deadline. This is obviously caveated because due to the pension fund assurance letter and other factors that might be taken into consideration at a later date. But we do have a timetable in place for the 2021 audit. In terms of page 12 of the agenda pack, there are a couple of changes to our audit approach. So when we delivered our audit plan back in February, this was where, as an audit team, we undertook a initial risk assessment at a point in time for the council. And obviously this risk assessment is an ongoing basis, is undertaken on an ongoing basis and can change. In terms of service organisations, in our original audit plan, we identified the Nottinghamshire Pension Fund as a service organisation. After detailed conversations with our quality colleagues and technical colleagues within the firm, we have decided that this doesn't actually meet the requirement of a service organisation. Therefore, we're taking this and sort of de-recognising it as a service organisation. It doesn't change the work and doesn't impact our audit strategy going forward. It's just for clarification in line with the relative standards. Significant audit risks. Again, I think this was specifically mentioned in our audit plan, but I just want to reiterate. Obviously, in 1920, there was an emphasis of matter in regards to material valuation uncertainty on property, plant and equipment and the defined benefit pension liability. We don't envisage this to be an issue or a similar approach for 2021, but as you can imagine, because COVID-19 is still around, this is a work in progress. So we are just sort of highlighting this to the committee that there might still be an emphasis of matter in 2021, but we will, as soon as we have been given the guidance and sort of we have finalised the approach, we obviously will let members know. As an additional requirement, we are potentially looking to obtain our own audit expert via an external qualified valuer that will support the firm's quality agenda and help our VAT PPE valuation testing. Again, this is in its early stages, but once this has been confirmed and relative assets agreed with officers, we will present, a more significant finding to members to ensure that the audit approach has been updated. And then again, the final point on page 12 I wanted to raise was around an additional audit risk, specifically relating to COVID-19 grants. Now, obviously, as you can understand, the council have received a substantial large amount of money in regards to COVID-19, whether this is directly for them or whether they've acted as an agent and this has been gone straight to other businesses. Because this is sort of a 2021 specific audit issue and it relates to large substantial material sums of money, with the audit team felt necessary that this has been raised as an audit risk for the current year and specific substantive testing needs to be undertaken, just to ensure that it shows that we're adapting and challenging management assumptions, and all the relevant considerations and implications are included on page 12. That's as much as I wanted to say, so I'll pause there and happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Michael. Just to add something to that, I think CMAP are also got their eyes on the distribution of COVID-19 funds, so I think we're belt and braced pretty well with that. So could I ask, did anyone wish to speak? Anybody got any comments or questions? I see Councillor David Shaw. Yes, whenever you're ready, sir, we'll just try and unmute you.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Just a quick one for Michael. Is there going to be any impact of cost? You're going to have another person actually audit yourselves with our books?
No, so we should, in terms of the standard, if we do employ an audit expert, we should be able to absorb the cost of that, because obviously that's an additional step we're putting in place for our quality agenda. The additional audit risk in terms of COVID-19 should not create or warrant any additional cost, unless there are obviously implications or issues that arise, because we do substantive work on grant testing anyway. So it's just a added sort of focus rather than additional work on top.
Just supplementary, Chair, if I may. You say audit risk. Are you concerned about the risk of recent COVID finances? Because you've highlighted the risk. You're saying there's a risk. Where would you put that on a scale of high risk, medium risk, or low risk?
So at this point in time, we would say it's probably, as a firm, that it's probably low to medium. However, that we are, and this is for all local authorities, not specifically aimed at obviously Ashfield. This is obviously all authorities that have obviously received all this additional COVID-19 funding. Where it becomes a bit more sceptical from an audit perspective is that obviously the funding was brought in at a substantial rate, and then the council was expected to distribute that relative income at a substantial rate as well. So, there are spaces, or there is reason for human error. We don't expect there to be obviously any related fraud, and we don't obviously, as an external audit team, go looking for fraud, but there are a lot of assumptions and judgments that we're aware of that are still being worked through by SIPFAT as well in terms of the accounting treatment. So at this point in time, I would say medium risk at best.
Okay, so a medium risk at best, but you're still employing an expert to actually oversee this.
No,
you're employing an expert.
No, the expert is in relation to the property, plant and equipment valuations. The COVID-19 grants will just be done internally as part of our standard procedures.
Okay, thank you.
So anyone else standing around here? No, so could I now ask for a show of hands to note the audit progress report as presented? Can I ask for a show of hands, please? Yes, that's unanimous. Thank you. That's been clearly carried. Okay, I'll just shuffle my papers around a moment. Just bear with me for a second. Right, agenda item 5, accounting policies for 2020 and 2021. And other statement of accounts matters, pages 23 through 44 on your notes. The audit committee is being asked to 1, approve the accounting policies detailed at appendix A to the report. 2, note that any subsequent amendments or changes to these policies and the associated financial implications will be reported back to this committee. Could I please hand over to Bev to present the report? Off you go, Bev.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair. So the report includes the accounting policies that will be applied for preparing the accounts in 2021. They're appendixed to the report to review. The accounting policies are based on SIPFA's accounting code of practice, which in turn is based on the International Financial Reporting Standards. And annually, SIPFA update their accounting code of practice for any changes to international financial reporting standards. This year, there were no newly adopted standards. They've only made some minor amendments to existing standards, and the areas that have been reviewed are included in 1.4 of the report. As I've just said, the changes they've made have been minor and just basically tweaked some of the wording, so they've not had any material influence on any of our accounting policies. So the accounting policies that are appendixed to the report are the same accounting policies that were applied in 1920. There's been no amendments made to them at all. So the report just asks you to approve those as the accounting policies that will be applied in preparing the accounts for 2021. So thank you, Chair.
Yeah, thank you very much, Bev. So to sum it up, hardly any changes, just a few tweaks. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. Does anyone wish to speak? Anybody got any questions? I'm looking. No, I think we're okay on that. Thank you. Well, can I now ask for a mover for the recommendation? Councillor Jim Blagden, thank you very much, sir. Thank you. Can we have a seconder, please? Councillor Kevin Rostons, thank you very much, sir. Okay, we will now move to the vote. And can I ask you all to clearly raise your hands, firstly, for the motion? Anyone against? It looks pretty much unanimous to me. Any abstentions? No? Okay, that's been clearly carried. Thank you very much. Oh, paper everywhere. Agenda item 6. Pension assumptions for 2020 and 2021, the statement of accounts. This is on pages 45 through 88 of your pack. And the audit committee members are being asked to consider the actuary's briefing note attached as Appendix A and the proposed IAS 19 assumptions detailed within, and to agree the assumptions as the basis for the calculation of the pension figures required for 2020-2021 statement of accounts. Wow. Could I please now ask Beth to present the report?
Thank you, Chair. So again, this is a report that we bring annually to Audit Committee, and it sets out the actuaries' assumptions that they'll use in calculating the valuation of our net pension liability at the 31st of March 2021. For context, the net pension liability at the 31st of March 2020 was just under £93 million. So therefore it represents a material figure in the accounts, which is why we ask Audit Committee to consider the assumptions. The assumptions are outlined in 1.9 of the report, which is page 46 of the agenda pack. There's been no changes to the methodologies in calculating the assumptions. They've just been updated for actual market performance of the relevant indices to the 31st of January 21. And the overall impact of the changes is shown in 1.10 of the report, which shows that there will be an expected increase in the liability. Points to note are that the estimated increase is based on an average pension fund, so it's not specific to Nottinghamshire Pension Fund or ADC's membership of the fund, so the actual results will differ. It's also based on performance to the 31st of January, and there will be some movement in the indices to the 31st of March. Other point to note is that the net pension liability is a balance sheet figure. So at this point, it doesn't impact on the revenue position. It's only when we have a triannual review and they reset or make changes to the employee contribution rate that it impacts on your revenue position. And the last change to the pension contribution was made in April 2020. So the next one will be in April 23 for the year 23-24. The alternative to accepting the standard assumptions is that we could ask for a bespoke report to be produced, but that would require additional cost and justification of why we don't want to follow the standard proposed assumptions. So the recommendation is that the standard assumptions are approved as the basis of the calculation for the pension figures that will be used in the 2021 Statement of Accounts. So thank you, Chair. Happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you, Beth. If I read on page 46, item 1.4, net pension liability, difference between assets held and projected liabilities as of March 31st, 2020 was on the good side of 92, almost 93 million. Have I interpreted that correctly?
Yeah, that's correct, yeah.
Okie dokie, it's quite a cushion there, I see. Okay, so anyone have any questions for Beth? Yeah, I see Councillor Dave Shaw.
Hi, Bev. Just a quick one. You say that the next review of this will be 2023. Are we envisaging this will be up by 5% in 2023, or will it be more than 5% as a liability to the pension pot? And as a percentage, how much of that percentage will come from the council taxpayers?
The liability gets assessed each year, which is why we bring the annual report each year, and the figure moves each year. But the actual implications on the pension fund are when they change the contribution rates, the triennial review, the 3-year review. So once we get to that point, it'll take into account the movement from the last time they did the pension review to the next time they do the pension review. So it'll encompass the changes of this year. It'll also take into account changes beyond this year for next year and the year after as well. So it's hard to know yet what the full implications will be when they actually do the triennial review, because it's an ongoing movement.
Are you okay with that, Dave? Yeah. Okay. So anyone else? I'm having a quick scan around. Can't see any arms raised. So then, thank you. Can I now ask for a remover for the recommendations, please? Ask for a remover. I see Councillor David Shaw. Thank you very much, Dave. And can we have a seconder, please? I see Councillor John Baird. Thank you very much. We'll now move to the vote. And can I ask you all to clearly raise your hands for the motion? Okay, that looks pretty much a full house. Any abstentions or any against? Okay, the vote has been carried. Thank you very much. Right, scooting along to agenda item 7. Pause to get my breath back. Independent member for the audit committee. This is pages 89 through 92 of your pack. Audit committee members are being asked to review and discuss the proposal to appoint an independent member onto the audit committee. Could I please ask Pete to present the report, please? Pete Hudson.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, this report is one that's been brought back following a report that we brought to Audit Committee in October. And what the report does is set out the pros and cons of having an independent member form part of the Audit Committee. It's not essential, it's not a statutory requirement to have an independent member, but it is deemed as good practice, both by SIPFA, the National Audit Office, and then more recently, the Redmond Review. So in the event that members, following discussion at Audit Committee tonight, decide that they would like an independent member on the Audit Committee, the next step would be to produce a report to Cabinet to request that. So the starting point is for members to determine whether or not, having considered the pros and cons, which are set out in paragraphs 1.2 and 1.3 of the report, whether or not this is something potentially you want to put to Cabinet for consideration.
Okay, thank you, Pete. So does anyone wish to speak on this? No, well, I'd just like to pass on my thoughts on this. If I look at page 90 and I see paragraph 1.3 and the SIPFA do though acknowledge the where authorities blah, 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 over relevance of independent members, in other words, lack of organisational knowledge or context, efforts if required to both, there's quite a lot of stuff on there, pretty negative to actually having someone of an independent status on the audit committee. This is really, that is purely my own personal opinion. And as there's no legislative requirement at the time to do it, I'm really at a loss of what we could do here. Could we pass it on or pass it on to Cabinet for them to make the decision? Or shall we see how you guys feel about it? I see Councillor Jim Blagden. Yes, on to you, Jim.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I mean, I'm a bit concerned about this. I don't like the sound of independent people on the panel. I really don't. Who selects the independent person? Who elects them? You know, and I'd really like to know not a lot more before we went down this road. I really would. Thank you, Chairman.
Yeah, thank you very much, Jim. I see Councillor Arnie Hankin, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'm much of the opinion as Jim, really. I don't really think it's for any of us to vote an individual in. I think, you know, the team do an absolutely fantastic job, and you know, the information that we get provided with, I think, is superb. If it's a voting scenario, I think that we forego this and we take it to Cabinet and let them make the decision, because I'm more than happy with how things carry on with what we do. It's, you know, they do a tremendous amount of good work. So I really think that Cabinet should make this decision and not this committee. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Arnie. Anyone else? I saw David. David, did you? Councillor Shaw, please. David Shaw.
Thank you. No disrespect, guys. Just direct question to Pete and to Bev. What benefits would you gain from having an independent person on here? Would it help you or would it hinder you? Because what we don't want to do is upset the apple cart and put a spanner in the works by saying yay or nay either way. I'm ambivalent to it. It's, you know, I just need a steer how you feel this would help.
It would really depend on whoever was appointed and what sort of background they've got. So If there was somebody with a strong finance background, and ideally somebody that's perhaps familiar with public sector accounting, potentially that is really helpful. It wouldn't affect Bev, myself and the team in any way as such, but it might give you that added security that questions that perhaps you may not feel comfortable about raising, that individual with the right background, if we are able to recruit somebody like that with that background, may be helpful to you as members.
Okay, thank you, Peter. Just another quick point I'd like to make. You know, we also, I'm sure we're all aware of the excellent work your people do, Pete, and think of the CMAP people. We've got our own internal checks and balances. We've got external auditors. Yeah, there's Michael Butler there, smiles away, and we've got the CMAP people. I personally, well, I was sorry, Mandy, I should mention you as well. I personally don't see any value in this, but I see Councillor Jim Blagden. Would you like to say something, Jim?
Thank you, Chairman, for letting me in again. Yeah, Chairman, we're on this committee. We're the ones who get all the information, and we make the decisions on this committee.
Yeah.
From the magnificent reports we get from the officers. And I think it's better for us to make the decision than the Cabinet, because we're more informed than the Cabinet. You know,
okay, well...
so I'm happy to move that we send to the Cabinet our recommendation to turn this down and not have an independent on the panel.
Thank you very much, Jim. Could someone second that, please? I see Councillor John Bird seconder. So shall we move to the vote? So can we have a clear show of hands for the recommendation that Jim raised? I've got my hand up as well, troops. That is unanimous. Any abstain? Any abstentions? Anyone against? No, so the motion is carried. Thank you very much. Pause for thought. Moving on to agenda item 8. Audit progress report, which are pages 93 to 114 of your committee packs. Can I please now hand over to Hannah MacDonald from CMAP to present this report? Over to you, Hannah, when you're ready.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So this is our usual internal audit progress report, which takes us up to the 17th of March. Firstly, I'd just like to apologise. There seems to be a bit of an issue with the formatting on this when it was converted from Word into PDF. So we've got a blank page in there and some of the tables don't flow quite properly. So apologies if that's impacted on anyone's reading of the report. The first thing that I just want to bring to committee's attention is the progress on the audit assignments table, which is on page 96 of the agenda pack. This just shows that there have been 7 pieces of audit work that have been completed from the 2020-21 internal audit plan, with 5 audits that are still to be completed. Since this report was produced, the people management draft report has now been issued, and the delegated decisions report has now, audit even, has now been moved to the in progress stage. There is one plan change to bring to committee's attention, and this was agreed with the Director of Legal and Governance. This change was around introducing the ability to undertake some data matching work on the second tranche of business support grants. To allow us to have the time to do this, we withdrew the contracts register audit from the internal audit plan. Moving on to the audit coverage completed audit assignments section of the report, which starts on page 97. This just sets out each of the audit assignments that have been completed since our last update to committee. The risk management audit was an advisory piece of work to help the council understand how to best accommodate the regulator of social housing's view of health and safety risk mitigation and reporting, alongside that of the general activities of the council. We identified 2 potential risk areas and put forward appropriate mitigating actions to address those risk areas. And the details of those are set out on page 97. The procurement audit was a follow-up piece of work, following up on a procurement audit that was undertaken in 2019-20. As a result of this follow-up piece of work, we gave a substantial level of assurance and raised 3 low-risk recommendations. The complex casework piece of work was given a limited level of assurance, and we identified 9 areas of weakness, 4 of which were categorised as low risk and 5 as moderate risk recommendations. And at the time of presenting to committee, all but one of these moderate risk recommendations has been addressed. The transformation project assurance audit focused on the planning system, and we gave it a limited level of assurance. There were 4 moderate and 5 low risk recommendations made, and management have agreed to take action to address the identified weaknesses by the end of May. The final 2 pieces of completed audit work in the period both relate to business support grants. The second round payments was the data matching activity that we undertook, and we considered the LRSG and ARG grants. We did highlight a number of data matches for further investigation, but ultimately no fraudulent grants were identified from the second round payments. The more in-depth piece of work we did on the first round of business support grant payments, we did raise 5 recommendations, but of these, management have taken action to address the issues for 4 of the recommendations by the time of finalising the audit report, and the 1 moderate risk recommendation that is still outstanding will be addressed by the end of March. Moving on to the recommendation tracking portion of the report, which starts on page 103 of the agenda pack. Members should note there are still quite a few outstanding open recommendations, which we are continuing to follow up with officers. The details of the moderate risk recommendations that are still in the process of being implemented are set out from page 105. And there are just a couple of updates to the details that are set out in this section that I just want to make members aware of. So the depot investigation, there's been a couple of changes on the revised action dates. So recommendation 1 is now due for implementation by the 30th of April. And recommendation 3 is now due for implementation by the 31st of March. And that was all I was going to say on this report, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Hannah. Has anyone got anything they wish to ask? Any questions on this? Having a skin round? No hands raised. Could I just ask one question, please, Hannah? On page 100, I've got to get there myself, just bear with me. On page 100, it's at the top of the page, it says there were a total of 10 weak controls identified. And underneath, where it's the summary of weaknesses, only lists 9. Have we missed one, or does one of those topics include 2 of the findings?
Yeah, we haven't missed one. Where we can, we do like to try and amalgamate issues to make one recommendation. It just makes it easier for officers to address those. So it's not a mathematical area. We've just amalgamated the issue in a couple of areas.
Okay, thank you very much. Anyone else? Do I see any questions? Okay, well, thank you. Can I now ask for a show of hands to note the audit progress report as presented? Could you please raise your hand, please, all in favour? Well, that's pretty much unanimous. In fact, it is unanimous. That's been clearly carried. Thank you very much. Yeah. Agenda item 9, Internal Audit Plan 2021 to 2022 and Audit Charter. Wonderful word. Pages 115 to 128. Members are being asked to consider and approve the contents of the audit plan for 2021-22 and the audit chapter as presented. Could I please now ask Mandy Marple from CMAP to present the report? Over to you, Mandy.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'll take the report as read. The purpose of this report is to approve the internal audit plan for 21-22 and the internal audit charter. Now, the internal audit charter is the same document that you've seen a couple of times before. It defines internal audit's purpose, authority, responsibility and position within an organisation, and it's the committee's role to review and approve the charter on an annual basis, and the detail of it's shown at Appendix B. The main focus of this report is on the plan for 21-22. So the plan's got to be risk-based, and it's got to enable me to give an annual opinion on the control environment at the council. So that's risk management, governance and internal control. The plan's also got to be flexible, and it's got to be adequately resourced. So we take into account the council's risk management framework, and we compile a risk-based plan in consultation with management, but using our own risk assessment model, where we have measures of impact and likelihood, and then the resultant proposed plan is derived from this, and that's shown on page 8 of the report, which is 122 in the members pack. So the plan's broken down into different types of audit work, and the areas of review have been agreed, but we don't consider the detailed scope at this point. That's done much closer to the audit with management at that time. And some of these audits you've probably recognised from the previous year's plan, and that's where we'd postponed them to the work that we've done on COVID instead. So these will be brought forward into this year's plan. What I will say is that the plan's got to remain flexible. If we've learned anything from this year, is that we don't know what the future holds, and we will adjust it if there's any new or emerging risks that we need to take account of. That's all I intend to say at this stage, Chair, unless anyone's got any questions.
Thank you, Mandy. Does anyone have any questions, please? Could I ask? No, I see. Maybe I've just got one point just to clarify. On page 122, the audit plan assignments in the middle there, anti-fraud / probity / investigation. Would that also include the topic that Mr. Butler had on there, the COVID-19 grants? Would you also be looking into that to take it to that?
Just let me find the.
Oh, right. What do you want? Page 122.
122. Yeah.
And it says right in the middle, anti-fraud / probity / investigation.
Yeah. Probably not in this case. We've done a significant amount of work on the grant side of things already this year. Yeah. That allocation there is a small number of days that we've set aside for consultancy to try and help the council to improve their overall approach to anti-fraud and corruption work. I'm sure Ruth's going to go on to explain in a few minutes. The part way down the road of putting together a robust anti-fraud framework, and what we've done in some cases is to advise or to contribute to ongoing work that they've got in a number of areas. Right at the bottom of that table, there's also where it says management advice. Yeah. It says there COVID related work, and that's a contingency that we're setting aside so that if anything further transpires with COVID work, then we have got an allocation of days that we can use to deal with that.
Great stuff. Thank you very much, Mandy. Well, if there's no other questions, can I now ask for removal for the recommendation? Can I ask for removal, please? Councillor David Shaw, and a seconder, please. Councillor Jim Blagden, thank you very much. So let's move on to the vote. Can I ask you all to clearly raise your hand for the motion? That's unanimous. So obviously against the motion or any abstentions, away we go. So that's been carried. Thank you very much. Wow, we're wading through it now, troops. Agenda item 10. Corporate governance and anti-fraud update, pages 129 to 146. Members are being asked to note 1. The local code of corporate governance is appended to the report and that no changes are required at this time. Good to know. 2. The process for preparing the 2020-21 annual governance statement. And 3. The summary updates relating to anti-fraud audit reviews undertaken during 2020 to 2021. So could I please now ask Ruth to present the report. Over to you, Ruth.
Thank you, Chair. The report is largely split into two. The first bit concentrates on the governance aspects, and the second half looks more specifically at anti-fraud and some data matching, and builds on some of the discussions we've already had this evening around the COVID grants and the work that CMAP have done for us in conjunction with Pete's team. So the first half of the report relates to our governance and how we make sure we're doing the things that we should be doing in the right way, but also being transparent in the way that we do them. We have obviously a framework of policies and procedures that collectively make up our governance arrangements, and different parts of the organisation are responsible for each of those elements, and we review those on a regular basis. This committee is particularly responsible for a suite of policies and procedures which are set out on page 130, which largely relate to things like anti-fraud and corruption and money laundering. And for those of you who were previously on this committee, we actually managed to review and update these just before the pandemic hit last February. We are due to review those again through the next municipal year, so you'll see that at some point during the forthcoming council year. But as part of our arrangements every year, we try to look at the local code of corporate governance, which really sets out the things that we expect to be able to demonstrate throughout the year to enable us to produce the annual governance statement, which forms part of the statement of accounts. Our local code of corporate governance is attached to the report, and at this point I'm not recommending that we make any changes to that. I think we looked at this and updated it in February 2020. We then had another look at that as part of the delayed annual governance statement, which came obviously later than we would normally have had during 2020 due to the pandemic. So it's been through review relatively recently, and there's nothing at the moment that strikes me that we need to do to update that. We do need to try and get this back on track. So we would normally look at the local code of corporate governance towards the end of the calendar year. So we're slightly out of sync because of what's happened through COVID. So we will try to get back on track and get our timetables back into sync. What we're then explaining in the annual governance is about the rearrangements this year for the annual governance statement. And again, we've got slightly different time frames because of COVID again. So the expectation is that we will bring it through to committee in September along with the statement of accounts, but we're obviously looking to have the AGS completed along with the accounts, the draft accounts, by the end of July. we're following the usual process for preparing the annual governance statement. So we will be organising an informal meeting of the committee to look at the draft AGS when that's ready. The second half of the report, as I said, relates to more specifically anti-fraud. And I think what we've tried to do in this report is pull together the work that we have done over the course of this quite difficult year. And I'd have to say that really lots of this work has been assisted by CMAP in terms of rejigging our audit plan for the year at our request to particularly help us around looking at the business support schemes and the other COVID related grants. So I will go into a little bit more detail about those, particularly in terms of some of the findings that came out as part of that. And hopefully it will demonstrate quite a robust process that we had in place, which should hopefully give committees some comfort. But the first piece of work that we looked at was asking CMAP to carry out a benchmarking review, really, to compare the council's anti-fraud arrangements to a new government functional standard. We specifically asked that, I think, as some more benchmarking and background so that we can look at how we match to what we are expected to have in place. How do we fit to that? Really to ensure that we can go forward and develop our practices and procedures to obviously hit those standards as far as possible over the next municipal year and as part of a planned way of working. So again, CMAP did that piece of work for us. There are obviously quite a lot of recommendations coming out of that, really to make sure that we improve some of those existing processes and procedures that I referred to earlier. So we would normally update them during the course of this year anyway, but this audit has identified where we need to improve and change our approaches to ensure that we are in compliance with the functional standard. We are about to, that report's actually in draft at the moment, and I think that was referred to in CMAP's audit update report. I think at the moment we're just finalising the recommendations along with CMAP, so that should be completed fairly soon. But I think what that the audit from the management of fraud risk audit, and obviously the way that we have struggled, I think, to provide sufficient resource across the council in relation to our anti-fraud programme over the last 12 months has demonstrated that we do need to take a step back and actually look at how organisationally we resource up to operational requirements around anti-fraud. I think it's fair to say that a lot of the programme of work is steered from myself. And obviously when I'm pulled across into things and reprioritised as we were during COVID, it does create a blockage and means that sort of progress that we would have intended to make hasn't been made. So I've had some discussions already with the chief exec to look at how we can improve things organisationally to ensure that we actually have a better operational resource. And I think Mandy referred to that again as part of the audit plan for the forthcoming year in terms of some of the consultancy work. So that again will help us to actually improve some of those and plug some of those kind of resource gaps that we've got internally. So we will ensure that we can use the expertise that CMAP have to help us take that on further. So that's more sort of overarching generic approach to anti-fraud. So the next two elements relate to the work of CMAP, specifically looking at the grants as part of COVID. I think Mandy referred to, Hannah I think referred to the large piece of work, which was around Small Business Grant Fund and Retail, Hospitality and Leisure Grant Fund. And I'm pleased to say that the report concluded there was a reasonable control in place around that. I think 5 recommendations were made, but I think, as Hannah said, 4 of those are now complete, and we're well on our way to finalising the 5th one. The review looked at each stage of the process, from prepayment checks through to post-payment checks, and some of the data matching as well. I think the prepayment side of it was very strong in its due diligence, and I think there were some positives that came out of that in terms of ensuring that we spent some time. I'm not going to take the credit for this. I think this is with Pete and with our and with Craig Scott, taking some time to make sure that our processes were strong before we actually started making payments. So we knew what we were looking at. We were doing all the checks in advance. We weren't just simply putting a quick process in place and paying things swiftly. We were trying to balance the need for speed against the need to ensure that we were checking things properly. And I think that was demonstrated that we'd done that. In terms of post-payment checks, there was some sampling done there. CMAP sampled 25 business rate grants and 15 discretionary grants. I think out of that, 8, I think Mandy called it suspicious. So I think we needed to dig a little bit deeper in terms of those. Out of that, 3 were shown to be legitimate and 5 were not. We followed those 5 up. 3 returned the payments, 2 refused to, and I think we're still looking at how we can take recovery action in relation to those 2. I'm not sure if Pete has any further update on that, but that's the latest information I got when I prepared the report. They then obviously did quite a lot of data matching for us on this, and again, whilst there were some queries, most were then demonstrated to be legitimate payments at the end of the day. Moving on to the second tranche, which was data matching for local restriction support grants and additional restriction grants, you'll see that CMAP examined 773 grants, which totaled a value of £2.4 million, in which I think they asked us to look at, I think it's 33, which we were flagged up as potential data matches. I think a couple were investigated further and some adjustments were made, but largely at the end of the day, those were shown to actually be legitimate payments. So I think in summary, in relation to that work, we've got, I think on page 135, we're showing that we've got something like 7,250 grants were paid of almost £30 million. And essentially we were looking at the end of it at around 5 suspicious claims right at the end of it. You know, so we got a large number of grants and payments that were made. A very low number compared to the number that we processed was shown to be potential fraud, and of those we've only got 2 that are outstanding in terms of action being taken. So I think committees should take some comfort from the robustness of the processes that we had in place as part of the grants rollout. And again, thanking Mandy and Hannah for enabling us to be able to see that through the data matching, the work that they've done with their colleagues at CMAP. So that's a very quick whistle-stop tour of those data matching and anti-fraud activities, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much, Ruth. That's good news. Yeah, keep up the good work, girls and boys. So, has anybody got any questions? Anyone would like to speak on the subject? I see Councillor Arnie Hankin. Can we unmute the man, please?
Well, it's not a question, Chair, really. Bloody good work, ladies and gentlemen. Absolutely fantastic. All that and just 2 outstanding. I'll tell you what, we've got one of the best teams. I know that. Thank you very much. Cheers.
There you go. Got some thumbs up on that from the rest as well. Anyone else wish to speak? Having a quick look. Anyone? No. No hands raised. So can I ask now for a show of hands to note the update and the report as presented, please? Could I please ask for a show of hands? Well, that's unanimous. Yep. Thank you. That's been clearly carried. Agenda item 11, whistleblowing annual update. Pages 147 through 150 on your pack. And members are being asked to note, 1, that no changes to the whistleblowing policy are required. 2, how the whistleblowing policy has operated during 2020 and 2021. And so could I please ask Ruth once again to present the report. Off you go, Ruth.
Thank you, Chair. Probably a more straightforward report, I think, here, Chair. We look at the whistleblowing policy through both Audit Committee and Standards and Personnel Committee. And again, whilst this committee was able to review and update the policy in 2020, in February 2020, unfortunately, the Standards and Personnel Appeals Committee didn't meet until July 2020. So there was some delay in finalising the revision during 2020, again, because of the pandemic. But I think as a result of that, it was finally approved at the Standards Committee meeting in July. And so having reviewed it again for both this meeting and the Standards Committee last week, it was felt that there weren't any further updates that were needed at this time. So just moving on into the application of the policy during the last 12 months, we've just had a single report for whistleblowing. It was an anonymous complaint which was received by myself and Carol Cooper-Smith, Chief Executive, through Unison. And it made allegations relating to environmental crime, fraud, corruption and bribery. It was, whilst it was an anonymous complaint, obviously the allegations were serious, and the complaint itself gave considerable detail, which meant that Carol and myself in consultation felt it was something that we should carry out quite a lengthy investigation into. And I think myself, I think I interviewed about 16 people as part of this investigation, including one of the police inspectors locally. That said, whilst I did interview lots of people and produce a fairly extensive report, no disciplinary action was taken as part of the conclusion of the investigation. And indeed, there was no evidence of environmental crime, fraud, corruption or bribery as a result of the extensive investigation. However, some management recommendations were made to improve some procedures. I think in terms of processes were unwritten rather than written down, so that the officers knew what they were supposed to do, but there was nothing that actually backed that up, for example, in writing. And then where the queries were, it was unclear as to how those queries should have been made. But ultimately, that was sort of more nitpicking. There was nothing significant there that warranted any disciplinary action. All those that were involved were carrying out their duties appropriately. Carol and myself have debriefed the trade unions as part of this process. I've also debriefed with the Director of Place and Communities, who's responsible for implementing those management recommendations, along with the new Assistant Director, Alistair Blunkett, who has also been debriefed about 3 days into his tenure at the council. So he's obviously working away now to ensure that those processes are put in place to improve things going forward. Carol and myself have also met with a large number of the workers who we interviewed to make sure that they understood the outcome of the investigation as well. Carol and I did talk to both unions as well, about how we might be able to improve, I think, the way that some of these anonymous complaints are actually made. So you'll see on page 149, there's a table going back over the last 5 or 6 years in terms of the number of complaints that are made. What that doesn't then go down to is the fact that over the last 3 years or so, all complaints have been made anonymously, and I think mostly through the unions. So whilst obviously our policy enables those anonymous complaints to be made, you'll understand that if complaints are made when the complainant is actually named, it is actually easier for us to go through the process with them, to interview them, to understand and check some of the credibility and the allegations that are made. So whilst, you know, people can clearly make anonymous complaints and that's allowed through the process, we do try to encourage people to come forward in person if at all possible, because that does usually end up with a better outcome, and also allows us to report back to the people directly in terms of outcomes. So we have talked to the unions about how we can encourage that. And one of the things that I'm likely to do is start being a little bit more frequently down at the depot on our other site, so that people can obviously see me and drop in to raise any concerns, as we think that might help nip things in the bud sooner, rather than actually things festering and becoming a wider, bigger complaint going forward. So we're going to trial a few things with the new assistant director to see if we can improve some of that going forward. But that's a short summary, Chair, of the action we've taken during the last year.
Great, thank you very much, Ruth. So a bit more proactive, yeah. So has anyone wish to speak? Anyone got any questions or queries? No, seems to be okay. So let's have a show of hands to note the update and report as presented, please. Can I have a show of hands for? Okay, that's unanimous. Anyone against? I can't see any hands raised or abstentions. No. So that's been clearly carried. Thank you very much. Right, that brings us to the end of the agenda, and I'd like to thank everyone for their attendance, the officers, members, and all our interested viewers. I'll call this meeting to a close, and please everyone continue to stay safe and have a nice cup of tea. Bye all.
Bye. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.